We want to take you now to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Officials are releasing a highly anticipated grand jury report. It actually details alleged abuse by hundreds of Catholic priests right across the state. Let's listen in.
Assistance was indispensable to our investigation. Over the last several months, an intense legal battle has played out between my office and individuals who have concealed their identities through sealed court filings. These petitioners, and for a time some of the dioceses, sought to prevent the entire report from ever seeing the light of day. In effect, they wanted to cover up the cover-up. They sought to do the same thing that senior church leaders in the dioceses we investigated have done for decades: bury the sexual abuse by priests upon children and cover it up forever. Shamefully, these petitioners still don't have the courage to tell the public who they are. Moments ago, an 884-page report issued unanimously by the 40th statewide investigative grand jury, the largest, most comprehensive report into child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church ever produced in the United States, was released. It builds on the Boston Globe's Spotlight report, which identified 229 abuser priests, the 2005 Philadelphia grand jury report into the Archdiocese, which identified over 60 abuser priests, and the 2016 Altoona-Johnstown investigation conducted by the Office of Attorney General, which named at least 50 abuser priests. The report published today, in accordance with the July 27th Pennsylvania Supreme Court order, has some redactions. Let me be very clear. My office is not satisfied with the release of a redacted report. Every redaction represents an incomplete story of abuse that deserves to be told. We have oral argument scheduled in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court for September the 26th. And you can be certain that we will fight vigorously to remove every redaction and tell every story of abuse and expose every cover-up. While those redactions represent just a very small fraction of the predator priests named by this grand jury, no story of abuse is any less important than another. Today, Pennsylvanians can learn the extent of sexual abuse in these dioceses. And for the first time, we can begin to understand the systematic cover-up by church leaders that followed. As the members of the grand jury wrote in their report, we need you to hear this. There have been other reports about child sex abuse within the Catholic Church, but never on this scale. For many of us, those earlier stories happened someplace else. Now we know the truth. It happened everywhere.
Hello, everybody.
Howdy.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while since you and I have done a video together.
Did you have fun at your rendezvous?
Yes, I did, and I have a personal best. Again, 30 yards offhand, and you can't get any more dead center than that.
That's not too bad.
It's not too bad.
You still shoot like a stormtrooper.
Yeah. Hey, I can shoot straight when I have to.
We're going to do something a little bit different today because we had an email, and we want to thank the source for sending us a file on the Catholic Church.
And it's quite interesting how closely these two things coincided, getting dumped all the information and then having this email just directly follow that.
Yes, and I want to thank several of you for sending me links to the news clip on the child abuse that was just announced in Pennsylvania with the Catholic Church. So this just kind of all came at once. It's like, okay, we need to do a video about this.
And we also want to remember that it wasn't too long ago that several Catholic nuns came forward with accusations of abuse among the nuns also. So
yeah,
there seems to be well, it doesn't seem to be. There has always been a child sexual abuse or a, or an adult abuse problem, not just within the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, but also among other religious institutions in the Catholic Church is obviously predominant in this, because that's one of the largest religions, in the largest Christian-based religions on the earth today.
Yeah, and as we know, they were involved in the Australian Royal Commission. They were hauled in there also, and I'm going to put the link down below. There is tons of exhibits and evidence and documents and everything involving them. So I'm going to put the link down below to that. And then everything else that we're going to be mentioning, I'm going to put the link to our website that's going to have the PDF and scans for that, because I'm going to be bringing up some books and some Kingdom Ministries. So hopefully we can get this all done in under 2 hours. Okay, first of all, I want to read the email. Thank you, Teresa. Hello, Mike and Kim. Not a witness, but I studied with them for a couple of years, then it hit me. They believe everything they teach, even when it's all bull. So I quit, thank God. I was raised a Catholic, and you should... Sorry, very small print. You should also do material on Catholics. Writing to you from Canada, all the best. Thank you, Teresa. So this is with your request and everybody else sending me links, to the news report about the Catholic abuse, and also the source for sending me the Catholic file.
Yes, and we also want to keep in mind that as exiting cult members of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, we encourage those leaving the Watchtower Bible Tract Society to do your research and look at the historical background of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society. So the same would apply in this instance also, because there seems to be a movement in the world today. People are becoming more enlightened to the history of, say, the Catholic Church and these other religious institutions. And what you're finding, and what everybody is now acknowledging, is that we have not been told the truth about any of this, that there are personal agendas afoot in everything like this.
Yeah, and the thing is, we've always mentioned in our videos that this spiritual abuse, this, physical abuse, this sexual abuse, this is what causes people to hate religions, hate cults. Look what's going on in the state of Washington in this country right now. Someone is burning and trying to destroy kingdom halls and cause damage, and there's a reward out for this person. But the thing is we can understand, when you become so angry at a religion. If I was a profiler with the FBI or something, I would say, look for somebody who was probably, disfellowshipped or disassociated themselves, who is being shunned by friends and family. And many of these people are very angry. We have a right to be angry, because look at what it has done to break up families. So I can understand why somebody is so angry. And also, I just want to mention, there's a group called Ghost that is becoming really popular. And our daughter was telling me about this, and I just want to use it just for an example. This Tobias Forge, who is the lead singer for this, was raised a Catholic, and it was shoved down his throat, and he was abused by the Catholic Church. And, this is what caused him to hate the Catholic Church. So now this band is anti-religious.
Yeah.
And, I'm putting the pictures up, but there is Facebook groups for this band, and our daughter is in some of them, and she was telling us that most of the people that love this band love their music because it's anti-religion.
Right.
And most of these people have been abused by one religion or another. So it's not just the Catholic Church, and it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. It's all these religions. And I know that's going to upset some of you Bible bullies, but it's a fact.
It's a fact you have
Churches
to live with.
/ cults have been abusing people since their very beginning.
And we have some evidence here in front of us that we're going to present just how far back at least the child sexual abuse goes, and how far back the church has been aware of it and has kept silent about it.
Yeah, so you can understand why the church makes people hate them.
And for us ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, many of us have come to hate the Watchtown Bible Tract Society.
Yes.
In some cases to extreme degrees.
Yeah, and it's not that we hate the people, the individual members, but you can understand the anger. You know, for a while I was angry at my mom for shunning me. So, you know, this anger. All right, moving on. We've got a manual here from the RMIT University, and I'm going to put this up, and I'm going to put the PDF on our website because it's like a 384-page book.
Yeah, it's quite the document.
Our personal opinion is we think this was done as a study after the Australian Royal Commission, you know, did their case study on the Catholic Church. And I believe it was case study number 50, if I remember right. But the name of this book is called Child Sexual Abuse in the Catholic Church, an interpretive review of the literature and public inquiry reports. And so we're just going to cover a few things that we saw in this book. And like I said, I'm going to put the PDF of this on our website. Now on page 15, the subheading is Child Sexual Abuse in the Catholic Church, Guiding Questions and Research Strategy. And I'm just going to read this first paragraph. While variously described as a problem or crisis or scandal or nightmare or scourge, the sexual and emotional abuse of children within Catholic settings by priests, religious brothers, and sisters is ultimately a tragedy of immense proportions. Novella 2015 calls it the Church's biblical lament, while for Coldry 2004 it is a Christian apocalypse. And in fact, I had an email from GG, and he said the gates of hell are breaking open, talking about, you know, this recent scandal in Pennsylvania. For Abbott 2012, it is the church's Golgotha, the ravaged innocence of the child, abused, assaulted, violated, raped, and sodomized, lies at the very center of this Catholic catastrophe. Many thousands of lives across the world have been badly damaged, if not destroyed, in the continuing and tragic saga of the sexual abuse of children, which can be traced back to New Testament times. In the first century, as we shall see, it has become an unholy mess. A priest offender has reflected, and what would God think? So that's kind of like the introduction to this booklet, so you can kind of see, you know, where they're going with this. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. Well, I'll let you cover these pages since they come before these pages that I have here.
Well, chapter 2 is entitled Child Sexual Abuse in the Catholic Church and Historical Perspective. And I want to just read paragraph 1, I guess about 2/3 of the way down. The intention of this chapter is to provide the evidence circumscribed through it is that child sexual abuse within the family or by priest and religious has always been known to the church, right back to its very beginnings in the first century. In this chapter, after looking at the limitations, we will present material in a linear, chronological manner right up until World War II. Did you guys catch that? The beginnings of the first century right up to World War II. You're talking a couple thousand years.
Right from the very beginning.
Sexual abuse. Okay, second paragraph, historiographical, archival, and concordant limitations. The sexual and physical abuse of children and teenagers has a long history within the living tradition of the Catholic Church that undermines the commitment and self-sacrificing work of millions of priests and religious men and women down to the centuries. Here we must delve back into the church's early history, while recognizing that documentation of much of what happened is likely to have been lost, even if it was documented, and is ultimately unknowable. That history goes back to at least to the Synod of Elvira in the first decade of the 4th century. And from then until now, from its earliest days, the sex abuse of children by priests and religious has been an issue. However, major historiographical and archival issues make the task of developing a coherent, sequential, chronological account difficult, if not impossible. Moreover, the provisions of many international concordance between sovereign states and the Holy See have served to keep much of the criminal abuse hidden away from public view.
Sound familiar?
It's exactly what the Watchtown Bible Tract Society has done. Like mother, like daughter, or like daughter, like mother. It is clear from the research evidence that lessons from history were not learned, shared and passed along, and nor were they incorporated into seminary formation in the 20th century. There are 6 hindrance factors, and it goes on into what some of those hindrance factors are. And again, the link down below, you can read this documentation for yourself.
Yeah, that was on page 33.
Now, the thing that I found interesting also on page 37, under the heading Child Sexual Abuse in New Testament and Patristic Times, evidence from sacred scriptures. Now, it should be noted that I had done a video earlier regarding the scriptures that are found in Numbers chapter 31, 17, and 18, but you can read the entire context and see that it is absolutely of a sexual nature.
Well, we had quite a few tell us that you were wrong, that they would take the little girls and adopt them and raise them as their own. And when you start looking at actual history,
Well, not only that, if that were the case, then why kill the boys?
Yeah, why kill the little
boys?
Why
kill the boys? If you're going to adopt the girls that have never known the ways of a man, then there was no provision for saving the little boys. They would kill the boys, and this came right from Moses' mouth. Well, that's addressed here.
Well, I just want to insert here real quick that we watched an episode of, I believe, The Naked Archaeologists about the Jews that were taken captive by the Romans. Well, guess what? They were taken to these Sodom and Gomorrah or Las Vegas cities.
And made sex slaves out of it.
And made sex slaves. And there's even evidence buried in the ash of the towns around Mount Vesuvius, when that happened.
That those Jewish exiles from the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE.
Yeah, I believe it was 79 AD when Mount Vesuvius blew. But I mean, they found writings on bathroom walls about these Jewish sex slaves. They didn't have a choice. They were taken as slaves, and when they're taken as slaves, it's for anything the master wants, including sex.
Yes. So, reading from here, about partway down, it actually quotes Numbers 31, 17, and 18. And now it quotes, "Now kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man. But save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man, and take them for yourselves." That's the quoted scriptures at Numbers 31, 17, and 18. And I recommend you please read the entire context, because when you read the context, you'll see that those military men suffered a scourge because of, sexual immorality with women of other nations. Goes on, no age of the virgins is given, and it is not clear if they were to be taken as wives or slaves. However, with the coming of Jesus, there is an absolute clarity about how children are to be regarded and treated. For he made children a central focus of his ministry, as previously suggested. They are models of discipleship. Their innocence is to be protected. And any abuse of children will merit the severest of punishments. This was quite unusual in the Greco-Roman context. Okay, in the next paragraph, about halfway down, it goes on and it reads, slaves, both male and female, including children, were available to be used in whatever manner by their owner. Slavery was an institution tolerated by the early church and its social-cultural Roman context. Now, I want to make a point here regarding this slavery in patriarchal times. We all, as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, we all remember the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Sarah was barren, but Sarah had a slave girl, Hagar, who was of the age to produce children. Do you remember what happened? Sarah, because Hagar was a slave, she gave Hagar to Abraham to produce children.
Hagar didn't have a choice.
She didn't have a choice. This is how slavery was viewed, even to the point of giving the slave over for sexual reasons, whether it be, for sexual pleasure or even just to produce children. This is how slaves were abused and used in that time period. Now, I know there are some out there who are saying, well, that was a cultural thing, yada, yada, yada. It's not accepted today. But look at how young people in the church setting have been viewed as toys for sexual pleasure. And that's why this church child sexual abuse is continuously perpetrated, because you see it in the patriarchal view of slaves back in that day. That mindset, my friends, has not changed. I don't care how you try to whitewash this. I don't care how you try to word it to make yourselves feel good about these things happening in the Bible. Those poor people that were the slaves and were used for sexual gratification, they had no choice in the matter, any more than children today that are fallen victim of child sexual abuse have any say in the matter. Okay, going on to page 39, the seal of confession in patristic times. Another issue parallel to the issue of child sexual abuse was confession and the seal of confession. Virtually no attention was given to the seal during the 20th century by sacramental theologians after the forensic examination by a German Franciscan, Bertrand Kirchschild. Christ gave no express command regarding the seal, at least none that has come down to us. Moreover, the seal necessary presupposed a secret confession which Christ has nowhere prescribed as the sole admission form. This gives great power to the church in respect of the conditions surrounding the administration of the sacrament. Now, I find this next paragraph very intriguing, just simply because I have been reading the works of Bart Ehrman, Lost Christianities. And what this book really does is it goes and it lays out how in the early churches there were many men that were battling for control of your mind and what a Christian was to believe to be the absolute truth. You had your Eusebians, your Marcionites, there were a few other smaller fractions, and you had your proto-orthodox. And orthodoxy, the proto-orthodoxy won out just simply because, well, they had longer swords. But
literally.
Literally. And let's not forget what was happening at that time in those early Christian battles for identity of what Christianity was supposed to be. Both sides, and in particular the proto-Orthodox, they all are accused and were accusing of writing forged texts. In other words, a text would come along and they would sign the Apostle Paul. And Kim and I have covered this before in previous videos along with our archaeological Bible, that many of the scholars suggest that 1st and 2nd Timothy are forged text. All three sides throughout the early church was doing this.
We'll come to find out that the Catholic Church, if you signed your own name to a sacred writing or an inspired work, the church would hunt you down and kill you. So they would sign someone else's name so they did not know who had written this.
Exactly, and that goes for the gospel accounts. But I found this particular paragraph intriguing because when I see what was being used to give their seal about confession, about not letting other people know what was, being said in the confessionals, I found this interesting because one of the books that was deemed a forgery became the basis of the confession, of the ecclesiastical confession, not being able, not having to tell anybody what was said by the sinner in the confessional. So what was adopted as church policy comes right from a forged text. I want to read this. In the very early history of the seal is entwined in the two questions of whether and to what extent secret sins were a matter of public confession, and whether they were subject to public penitence. The biblical sources in Kirkshield's view do not indicate whether confession should be public or private. One of the books, the Diosh 80 to 100, and the Epistle of Barnabas towards the end of the 1st century, as well as the letter of Pope Clement I. Now, I'm just going to end right there because the rest of it just shows just to what extent they went into this. And this is some of the things that Bart Ehrman brings out in his book, that the early church fathers were claiming one side as being heretical because of their views. The church later adopted as being church policy. So when they're going around trying to kill all these heretics for, heresy, became church mandate. But I want to read a paragraph from Bart Ehrman's book found on page 197 because it really sums up and it puts into context what's being said here. Charges of reprobate activity. Of page 197, bottom of the page, Of all the weapons in the proto-Orthodox literary arsenal, one was particularly barbed. The heretics, we are constantly told, not only corrupt the truth and the Scripture, but they also corrupt other people and themselves corrupt. The heresiologists insist that their opponents were morally reprehensible and sexually perverse. In their foul practices, they're in the church as they take the innocent and defile them. So here
in the church.
And here you have the church fathers condemning the heretics for sexual perverse behavior and all of this stuff, and yet they themselves were practicing it all the way clear back to the 1st century.
Now I'm going to go back to this book that we've been reading from, this report of child sexual abuse in the child in the Catholic Church. And I'm going to go to page 293 because this goes along with what Mike was just saying about them defiling the innocent and they're blaming the heretics. Well, look at, even for example, the Knights Templar. You know, the Pope went after the Knights Templar and called them sodomites and, you know, Knights of Satan and all of this. They were horrible people that defiled the innocent and sodomizing people and everything else. So they had to demonize them. But the Catholic Church was doing the same thing. So on page 293, the first full paragraph, in 1051, Peter Damian, 1007 to 1072, wrote his book, Liber Gomorrhaeanus, where he particularly singled out the sodomizing of young boys by clerics as one of their common sins. But the German Pope Leo IX, 1049 to 1054, was persuaded, perhaps correctly, that he had exaggerated the problem, preferring forgiveness to punishment. At this time, new penitential manuals for confessors were being introduced, and it is clear that child sexual abuse was not an upfront topic in the 26 manuals examined by Payer, 2009, although 3 of the manuals dealt explicitly with clerics and monks who pursued young boys. And then it goes in to, you know, some of the history of the child abuse. It talks about the very beginnings of the Catholic Church presence in Australia from a diary here, that there was a abuse problem. Now I'm going to go down to the third paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down. In 1919, a Christian brother was jailed for child sexual abuse in Western Australia, and the archives of the Christian Brothers revealed that the sexual abuse of boys was a recurring problem for this religious teaching order throughout the 20th century. Nothing systemic was ever done about it, and it was kept carefully hidden from the Australian Catholic community. So you see, this was a history of the Catholic Church, and as we know from the news reports, you know, that are going around right now in Pennsylvania, that they have been hiding this for years. Over 300 priests, you know, and over 1,000 abuse survivors that they know about. Back to this, page 293, the last paragraph. Any cohesive and comprehensive narrative of the deep history of child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church over the past 2,000 years is virtually impossible. Notwithstanding that many clues throughout that history, this is because of the systemic destruction of secret archival material according to the requirements of Canons 489 and 490. The non-searching of archives, the downplaying of the issue by Catholic priests and religious historians who had examined the relevant archives, the use of code words and euphemisms, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And, yeah, in the eyes of the Catholic faithful, a desire to protect the good name of the offending priest or religious and to protect the reputation of the Catholic Church as all holy.
And that's no different than what the Watchtower Bible Tract Society has done in protecting their name by getting rid of those who speak out against these atrocities.
Yeah. Now, page 295, and I'm not going to read this, but the subheading at the top, patriarchal imaginary of God as all-seeing, all-powerful, and all-forgiving. See, if you do enough good, it covers the sins, and God will forgive you for abusing children. And I'm wondering if that isn't, you know, the governing body's take on this.
Well, I'm sure it
is. You know, if these, you know, witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses, do enough good, oh, well, they're an elder, you know, and that was years ago, so we'll keep them in their position because they're shepherding the flock now. So God will forgive them. Jehovah will forgive them.
You're actually leading up to a very good point also from Bart Ehrman's writings.
Oh, am I?
Yes, you are.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Well, I want to read on page 235, bottom of the page, Because in reading all of this and recognizing the horrible sins, the horrible crimes that these religions are getting away from, to me at least, it's become apparent that these groups don't believe what they're teaching from the platform is actually coming from our Heavenly Father.
So you think the Catholics don't believe they won't be going and burning in hell for abusing children?
Well, when you realize that there was a lot of forgeries going back and forth, and then as you read some of the words in these forgeries, you can see that the wording is getting more and more and more condemnatory. Now, if these guys are writing the forgeries, then it's not coming from God. It's coming from their own mind, their own sense of destroying the opposing side. And the more they try to depose, the more a fiery hell comes forward. That's why it's important to read some of these critical writings that modern day scholars are doing for our benefit. But I want to read this. It says, yet other books are...
Page
235.
The last paragraph at the bottom.
Yep. Yet other books are pseudonymous, forgeries by people who explicitly claim to be someone else. Included in this group is almost certainly 2 Peter, probably the pastoral epistles of 1st and 2nd Timothy, which is what we've already done a previous video on, and Titus, and quite likely the Deutero-Pauline epistles of 2nd Thessalonians, Colossians, and Ephesians, and possibly 1 Peter and Jude. That's quite a list of letters that are very suspicious of being forgeries. But why would someone claim to be a famous person from the past? As we have seen, it is principally in order to get a hearing for his views. And these authors' views were not merely heard. They were accepted, respected, granted authority, and included in sacred scripture. Now, as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, we know how very well the Watchtower Bible Tract Society is adept in using these particular books to keep us under control through the use of fear. If these guys in the Watchtower Bible Tract Society and all of these church fathers and these priests are of the mindset that these are forgeries, that they're not from God, they're written from the perspective of man's minds, but given authority by assigning Paul's name to them, then they don't believe that there's any consequences to their bad behavior. But yet, they make us believe that we are held accountable for our bad behavior. But yet, they themselves probably don't believe it because, well, I cannot imagine this day and age that someone on the governing body of the Watchtower Bible Tract Society are not aware that some of these letters are forgeries, and yet they're in the Bible canon. So why would they fear God in the way they make us fear God when they are recognizing that these letters from the 1st and 2nd century, 3rd century, and 4th century are forgeries? In their minds, there is no accountability to God because they recognize them as forgeries.
Well, I'll just read this paragraph that's in the Catholic book here we have. The offender's ideation of God was compounded by the vow of obedience to the divine will is mediated through church morality and praxis and internalized during their training in the seminary or house of formation. It was not a blind obedience, but a submissive and deferential obedience to God and his representatives on earth. Sound familiar?
Sound familiar? Exactly.
So it became necessary to conduct a negotiating and bargaining process with God. Such as, God allows the good and the bad. He allows the offending because of all the good that I do. God will look after this particular child and see that it comes to no harm. It will have its special protection. And when God called me, He knew what I was like, what my needs were. Offenders were able to justify the stealing of sex from the child, for how could it be that bad if God allows it? And it is not really abuse, no actual penetration and no violence. They are not harmed or affected. So this is the justification that they make in their own
minds,
twisted minds.
Sick, twisted reasonings of men to justify child sexual abuse.
Now, I went through some of the evidence that is under the Australian Royal Commissions. They have a lot of exhibits that when they were, handling this case study with the Catholic Church, tons and tons of evidence, letters, statements, manuals, you name it. But I just wanted to bring up a couple of the evidence pieces here. There's a flow chart here of what they're to do on an reportable conduct allegation. Do you think it's to report to the authorities, call the cops?
Well, sure, we all know that the Catholic Church would do the right thing, right? Surely they would.
So they go through this flow chart, and it's not until you get down to here that if there's a preliminary assessment indicates child at risk. So only if the child is at risk, then it says report to Child Safety Services.
Wow.
But after you go through the flow chart over here, preliminary assessment indicates unlawful behavior, then you report it to the Tasmanian police, since this was in Australia. But I mean, you go through the allegations and all of this first, basically the higher ups of the Catholic Church. And same thing over here. It doesn't get to report to the children till you get, or to the children protective services
Right.
and police until almost the bottom. But something else I found interesting in that, a letter here from the Pope. Okay, and I'm going to put this in our website too. Letter of His Holiness Pope Francis to bishops on the Feast of the Holy Innocents. And the date of this letter is December 28, 2016. So this was after they had started the Australian Royal Commission. Dear brother, and it goes into today on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, as the words of the angel to the shepherds will resound in our hearts. And he goes into all of this, preaching and biblical, stuff and talking about Christmas. But here on the second page, the last paragraph at the bottom, I would like to read this. We hear these children and their cries of pain. We also hear the cry of the Church, our mother, who weeps not only for the pain caused to her youngest sons and daughters, but also because she recognizes the sins of some of her members, the sufferings, the experiences, and the pain of minors who were abused sexually by priests. It is a sin that shames us. Persons responsible for the protection of those children destroyed their dignity. We regret this deeply and we beg forgiveness. We join in the pain of the victims and weep for this sin. The sin of what happened, the sin of failing to help, the sin of covering up and denial, the sin of the abuse of power. The Church also weeps bitterly over the sins of her sons, and she asks forgiveness. Today, as we commemorate the Feast of the Holy Innocents, I would like us to renew our complete commitment to ensuring that these atrocities will no longer take place in our midst. Let us find the courage needed to take all necessary measures and to protect in every way the lives of our children so that such crimes may never be repeated. In this area, let us adhere clearly and faithfully to zero tolerance. With fraternal affection, Francis, from the Vatican, 28 December 2016, Feast of the Holy Innocents.
You know what? I just thought of something when you were reading that. If that letter's a forged letter, who really cares? Because the Catholic Church has made a history of forging texts anyways.
Well, apparently it's a letter that went out to these priests, and it was given to the Australian Royal Commission, as them wanting to, make amends. But the thing is at least the Catholic Church admits this. they apologize, they admit it's a sin, and they don't want it to happen anymore, and they want to take steps to prevent this from happening again. And what has Watchtower done?
Well, unlike Watchtower, if I'm correct in remembering what we've read, the Catholic Church is part of the redress scheme.
I believe so.
In the Watchtower Bible Tract Society, as to the making of this video, we have not heard that they've become part of it. They're actually still standing against it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Now, I just want to mention that if anybody wants to do some research on the Catholic Church and some of their history and some of their icons and beliefs and doctrines, there is a book called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. And the copyright on this one, I don't see a copyright. But I want to mention that you guys are not going to believe some of the history connected with Jehovah's Witnesses and this book. Now remind me to mention that page. Okay. Kingdom Ministry. Yes, that is an authentic kingdom ministry. This is August 1983. And if you go to the back page on announcements, new publications available. Third one down, The Two Babylons, Congregation, Public, and Pioneers, $5.20. Hey, it's available in English and French. It was available through the literature counter in 1983 at your Kingdom Hall.
I even remember my dad getting that book.
Yeah. Now from the September 1985 KM announcements, page 3. The following price changes will become effective September 1st, 1985. The Two Babylons. Pioneers could get it for $8, and the Congregation in Public, it went up to $10. And then in the Kingdom Ministry, November 1987, page 3 announcements. Out of stock in the United States of America, The Two Babylons, English. So it was a very popular book, even amongst Jehovah's Witnesses, because it debunked the cross. And that's why Jehovah's Witnesses,
Right.
because of debunking the Catholic, doctrine and all of that. But when they realized that Jehovah's Witnesses were reading in here about the cross and how Jesus died on a cross, they started asking questions, and then of course it was discontinued from being sold at the Kingdom Halls.
Yeah, in fact, some time back, Kim and I actually did a video regarding this, the pagan cross, and this gentleman that writes his book says it's basically not to be confused with the Christian cross. Yeah. So when Jehovah's Witnesses were reading that, it was causing Jehovah's Witnesses to ask questions about the cross, the Christian cross, because we all know that Jehovah's Witnesses believe Jesus died on a upright pole with his hands above his head.
Yeah, and so then that's why they had to discontinue it. But I just want to say that book, this book, was available through the Kingdom Hall literature counter, and it's right in the KM. You can check it out. But I just wanted to bring out on page 234, and there's several pages here, is talking about the fiery serpent. And I know Mike just did a video here about the Leviathan, but when you start reading about the history of this fiery serpent and the Catholic Church and many other religions, so many of it goes back to pagan serpent worship. There was serpent cults, and some of this made its way right into, the Catholic Church.
Yeah. And other religions. Yeah.
Now, I believe we found this one on eBay.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Either that. Yeah, I think it was eBay.
I think it was.
Yeah. So
anyhow, are we about done?
I think we're done.
We're done. Thanks for watching, and for those that have a genuine interest in learning how early Christianity came about, the passing of forgeries, and how some of these forgeries actually made it into our canonized Holy Scripture, I would recommend reading Bart Ehrman's Lost Christianities, or you can find him on YouTube because he gives his lectures on YouTube.
Yeah, in fact, he does one called The Lost Christianities.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting read because from what I can glean, some of the things that were considered forged texts, heretical thought process actually made it in to the Bible canon.
Yes. And I don't know if we're going to do a video about it, but if anybody wants to do some research on YouTube, there's some videos. Put in the Star of David.
Or the Star of
Rephraim, the Star of Rephraim, and they give the Bible scriptures, and it talks about where the Star of David or the Shield of David, where they think it may have originated, and it's really interesting.
And, the biggest question that you're left with, if this was truly the Star of David, then why has this star made its way into Hinduism? Why has it made its way into Catholicism? It's a really intriguing, insightful video. It really is.
Yeah, maybe I'll just put the link down
Several
below to, some of them that we watched, just for those of you who like a little bit of extra research.
Who have a genuine interest.
Yeah, who have a genuine interest in, some of the roots of some of these icons and symbols and stuff. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and thank you for subscribing and all your emails and comments. We appreciate it so much, and for your love and support. We appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. God bless.